When my son slammed the door shut behind me and shouted, "You're no longer needed here, Mom," I didn't even flinch. My hands were still trembling from the job termination letter I held, and the betrayal that came right after. The letter was still warm, fresh from the printer, the ink barely dry, but it didn't burn as much as his words. I stood there, on the front porch of the house I helped build, brick by brick, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice, watching as the door to my past, my pride, and my motherhood was shut in my face. I stepped off the porch slowly. Not with anger. Not with tears. But with a strange kind of calm. A soft smile stretched across my face, not the smile of a broken woman, but the smile of someone who finally saw everything clearly. Not because I was defeated. But because earlier that very morning, long before that letter landed in my hand and before my son's words stabbed through my chest, my phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. It was from my lawyer. Funds cleared, 8 million euros deposited successfully. He had no idea. None. No idea that the woman he had just kicked out wasn't a burden. Wasn't a disappointment. Wasn't some washed-up old lady with nothing to show for herself. He had no idea he just threw away the very reason his life had ever been stable in the first place. The woman who skipped dinners so he could eat. The woman who worked double shifts so he could go to college. The woman who pawned her wedding ring just to make one last mortgage payment and keep the roof over their heads. He had no idea that I had just become a multimillionaire. Not through luck. Not through a lottery. But through years of grinding, smart investing, quiet sacrifices, and holding on to hope when the world had given me none. And what I did next? Well, let's just say, he'll never forget it. My name is Margaret Walker, a 66-year-old mother from a quiet little town in Iowa. I raised my son, Matt, all by myself after my husband, Peter, died in a car accident when Matt was just 4. That night, when the police knocked on our door, holding Peter's wallet and wedding ring in a small Ziploc bag, I knew my life would never be the same. But I didn't cry. I couldn't. I had a little boy standing behind me, clutching the hem of my nightgown, whispering, "Is Daddy coming home?" From that moment on, I became both mother and father. I gave up everything. I was once an artist. I used to spend hours painting sunflowers and rolling hills on canvas, dreaming of having my own gallery one day. But after Peter died, my brushes dried up. I traded my apron for a steel plant uniform. I worked the day shift and cleaned houses in the evening, just to keep the lights on and food on the table. I remember hand-sewing patches on Matt's torn jeans before school, staying up all night to help him finish science projects, and skipping meals so he could have seconds. When his textbooks got too expensive, I pawned my engagement ring, the last piece of Peter I had left, without hesitation. Matt was everything. He was the reason I smiled after 12-hour shifts. The reason I kept going even when arthritis made my hands scream. I used to look at him and think, maybe I didn't get the life I wanted, but I gave him the chance to live his dream. And he did. When he got his first job in tech after college, I sat way in the back of the graduation hall so no one would see me weep. I thought we'd won. I thought we had made it. That all the sacrifices finally meant something. But slowly, I noticed something changing. The boy who used to hug me after school started replying to my messages with one-word texts. The young man who once called me his hero started forgetting my birthday. His tone became sharp. Dismissive. He told me to get with the times, that my opinions were outdated. But I told myself it was just stress. A phase. I refused to believe that success had changed him. Until the day, he slammed the door in my face. As the years went by, the changes in my son became more noticeable. At first, it was subtle, a missed call here and there, a less frequent visit. But then the real shift began, small comments here and there, nothing too obvious, yet something in his eyes told me something had changed. "Mom, you wouldn't understand. Things work differently now," he would say. Or, "You're old-fashioned." I tried not to let it hurt. After all, I knew he was stressed. Life was hard. He had a young family, a demanding job, and Christina, his wife, who never really warmed up to me. Christina was cold, distant, and had always made it clear she didn't think much of me. She viewed me as some old-school burden, someone who didn't understand how the world worked anymore. To her, I was just an obstacle, a reminder of a past she had no use for. But despite all of that, I never stopped caring for them. Every Sunday, I was out there, cleaning their backyard, trimming the hedges, fixing leaky faucets, and doing all the small things that seemed to go unnoticed. I babysat my grandkids for free, took them to school, and always showed up when they needed me, even if it meant putting my own needs aside. One year, when their mortgage payment was short, I did what any parent would do. I quietly sold my old pickup truck, the one I'd kept for years, which held so many memories of hard work, and gave them the money. They didn't ask. I didn't offer an explanation. I just did it. Because that's what I had always done for them. I sacrificed my own comfort to make sure they never had to worry. But despite everything, none of that seemed to matter. One morning, I walked into their house with the termination letter in hand, my heart heavier than it had ever been before. I hadn't expected this. After 40 years of loyal service, after putting everything into a career, I had been let go. I had spent my whole life making sure my family was taken care of, and now, at 66, I had nothing. I lost my job, son, I said, my voice shaking as I stood in the doorway, holding the letter that seemed to burn my hand. After 40 years. They let me go. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of everything I had given. The silence that followed felt like an eternity. He stood still, his face unreadable for a long moment. I thought he would come to me, tell me everything would be okay. But then, he did the unthinkable. His eyes, once filled with pride, now seemed empty. Cold. He took a step back. The words he spoke next crushed me, pierced deeper than anything I'd ever felt. Maybe it's time you left, Mom. We can't keep going on like this. You've been living here long enough. I think it's time you move out. You're just too much to handle right now. In that instant, everything I had worked for, everything I had given, my love, my sacrifices, my life, meant nothing. The man I had raised, the boy I'd given my everything to, had just thrown me away. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, the termination letter now trembling in my hand. I thought of all the late nights I had stayed awake, making sure he was safe, making sure he had everything he needed. And now, this? This was my reward. But there was something in me that didn't break. Something that didn't collapse under the weight of his words. I smiled softly, almost imperceptibly, as I turned and walked out of the door. I smiled because I knew something he didn't. I wasn't the one who had lost everything. He was the one. He scoffed. So what now, Dad? You're gonna live off me? I stared at him, the words cutting through the silence like a knife. Matt. I gave everything to raise you. Yeah, and I didn't ask for that, he yelled, his voice sharp, full of anger. His hand slammed the coffee cup onto the counter, causing it to rattle. Christina didn't even flinch. She just sat there, watching me with that smug, condescending look. It was like I was invisible. You've done your part. You're not our responsibility. I looked from him to Christina, both of them standing in judgment, and then his finger pointed toward the door. You should leave before the kids wake up. It felt like a punch in the gut. My son, my flesh and blood, was kicking me out. I stood there frozen, my heart aching, my entire world crumbling. I'd spent so many years trying to be everything for him, and now this was the result. I couldn't believe it. My mind raced, trying to piece together the son I thought I knew. Without a word, I slowly turned around. I didn't even know how to feel. There was no fight in me. No anger, no tears. I was hollow, drained by the sheer betrayal in his words. I placed the termination letter on the kitchen table, the crumpled piece of paper representing a lifetime of hard work. The letter that had cost me my dignity. Then, I walked out. My hands were shoved deep into my pockets as I trudged down the walkway, the cool morning air biting at my face. I didn't look back. I couldn't. It felt like I had been tossed aside like I was nothing. But the truth was, I had something he didn't know about. And that morning, I had opened an email that changed everything. It had come through at 8:32 a.m. A simple notification from my lawyer with the subject line, Final Transaction Rick Mason's Will. Rick Mason. I hadn't heard that name in years. He was an old army buddy of mine from Vietnam. We'd served together, and during a raid, I'd saved his life. He owed me nothing, but we had a bond that was unbreakable. Over the years, we lost touch, but we'd stayed in contact through occasional letters and calls. He told me once, if anything ever happens to me, you'll know. Just promise me that you'll always have my back. And I did. But I never expected this. Rick had become incredibly wealthy later in life. He'd invested in real estate across Europe, turning every move into a fortune. And when he passed away, he didn't leave his wealth to any family or extended relatives, he left it to me. 8 million euros. The words on the screen burned into my mind as I read them. The email, the confirmation, it all hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't the old man with nothing. I wasn't the failure he thought I was. I was now worth more than my son would ever know. I didn't rush into spending that money. No, I remained calm. I lived modestly. I moved into a small apartment, far from the life I had been accustomed to. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I didn't need the luxuries anymore. What I needed was time, space, and a plan. I took a trip to Europe to finalize the paperwork, stayed in a small hotel with faded curtains and basic amenities. It wasn't much, but for the first time in years, I felt a strange peace. The money, the power, it was all there, waiting. But I wasn't in a hurry. I needed to think. I needed to watch. When I returned home, I began digging. I had time on my side now, and I wasn't going to waste it. I researched every aspect of Matt's life. Matt and Christina were living the high life, fancy cars, designer clothes, big house, but it was all built on a shaky foundation. They were drowning in debt. Their credit cards were maxed out, their loans piling up. Everything was leased, every luxury a borrowed illusion. But it wasn't just that. I learned that the company Matt worked for, his pride and joy, was in serious trouble. I did my homework. The scandal that rocked the firm had left it teetering on the edge. One wrong move, one scandalous piece of news, and the whole thing would crash. And that's when the idea hit me. I wasn't just going to watch him fail. I was going to make him feel it every day. So, I did what any man with 8 million euros and a lifetime of betrayal would do. I bought his company. I contacted a top investment firm, set up a shell company to keep my involvement hidden, and quietly purchased 80% of the company's shares. Legally. Efficiently. No one knew a thing. Not even Matt. Within weeks, I was the majority shareholder. And my first move? Fire the CEO. And guess who that CEO was? My son. It was a Friday morning when Matt received the letter, ironically, the exact same way I had received mine, just weeks before. He stormed into the boardroom, his eyes wild with panic. The atmosphere in the room froze. He was clearly rattled. There's a mistake. Someone sent me a termination notice. Who the hell signed off on this? I stood from the far end of the table. My suit was crisp, my tie straight. I was calm, composed, completely in control. I did, I said. Matt's face drained of color. His eyes widened in disbelief. Dad? It's Mr. Walker now, I replied coldly. The room fell silent. You could hear a pin drop. The shock that spread across Matt's face was almost painful to watch. He couldn't comprehend what was happening. This wasn't supposed to be how it worked. I was supposed to be the old man. The one who relied on him. But now, the tables had turned. The silence was thick, suffocating. It felt as if time had stopped altogether. You taught me something important, Matt, I said slowly, locking my eyes with his. You taught me that loyalty, sacrifice, and love mean nothing to someone who can't respect where they came from. But, you can't do this, he shouted, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and disbelief. Oh, but I already have, I said, my voice calm and unwavering. I turned to the firm's attorney, who had been quietly watching the exchange. Effective immediately, Matthew Walker is relieved of all duties, without severance, I announced. Matt stood there, dumbfounded. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. The humiliation was written all over his face. Outside, I could hear the distant screech of tires. Christina, in her usual dramatic fashion, had been waiting in the parking lot. When Matt broke the news to her, she screamed so loudly that it echoed across the courtyard. The security guards had to intervene, escorting them both off the premises. I knew they would be fine. They had their fancy house, their fancy cars, but in that moment, it didn't matter. I'd done what I came to do. Later that evening, as I drove past their house on my way home, I saw the for sale sign planted firmly in the front yard. Poetic, wasn't it? It wasn't just the end of their financial stability, it was the end of their illusion. They thought they could walk over me. But now, the shoe was on the other foot. 3 months later, I sat on the balcony of my new home, a peaceful coastal property in Maine, overlooking the vast, endless ocean. The sound of the waves crashing against the rocks below was soothing. It was the kind of place my late wife, Martha, had always dreamed of. I kept a picture of her on the table beside me, smiling back from the frame, as if she were still here. I smiled softly, the weight of everything finally lifting off my shoulders. "We did it, Martha," I whispered to her, as if she could hear me. Matt had tried to reach out once, leaving a voicemail on my phone. "Dad, I didn't mean it. I was stressed. Can we talk?" His voice cracked, filled with regret. I didn't return the call. Some things, I realized, are better left unspoken. Not every bridge needs to be mended. Sometimes, silence is the loudest response. Now, I travel. I read. I donate anonymously to veterans' causes, trying to give back to the community that gave so much to me. I mentor young men who remind me of the person I used to be, helping them avoid the same mistakes I made. I'm finding peace in the things that matter, the things that last. And at night, I sleep soundly. Because karma doesn't always show up with fireworks. Sometimes, it comes in a quiet, subtle way. It doesn't demand attention, it just works its magic, effortlessly. Sometimes, it walks in silence, and smiles as it leaves a house that never truly deserved you. To anyone out there who has given everything, your time, your heart, your sweat, and received nothing in return, let this story serve as a reminder. Your value isn't defined by how others treat you. It's defined by the strength you summon when they betray you, when they turn their backs on you, when they dismiss you as insignificant. Your worth is in your resilience, your ability to rise, to keep moving forward, even when the world seems to crumble around you. I spent years pouring myself into someone else's dream. I sacrificed my happiness, my health, and even my sense of self for the people I loved. But in the end, when they turned away, when they told me I wasn't worth their time, I found something far greater than I ever expected. And sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't a grand gesture. It's not about making someone suffer for what they did to you. It's not about watching them crumble beneath the weight of their own actions. The sweetest revenge is simply knowing you no longer need to prove yourself to anyone. You don't need to beg for love or acceptance. You don't need to shout your worth from the rooftops. Because in the silence of your own strength, you already won. And in that quiet victory, you find your peace. You find your power. So, to anyone who's felt unseen or unappreciated, know this. You are enough. You always were. And sometimes, the best thing you can do is walk away, knowing that your story is far from over. Your victory is waiting just beyond the horizon.